Recording in progress.
Unit 4.4.4 Changes in the concepts of motherhood and fatherhood. Now, this is the last topic from this particular chapter, and this would officially bring the unit family from paper 2 to an end today. So, unit 4.4.4 Changes in the concepts of motherhood and fatherhood. Now, before we get started, when we talk about motherhood and fatherhood, uh, I'm sure you'd all agree that the entire notion of motherhood and fatherhood, it is a social construct, right? Now, the first term I'm using over here is this being a social construct. The question is, why is it that I'm referring to this as a social construct? क्योंकि आपकी society decide करती है कि how motherhood and fatherhood should be like. Do we understand this? Right? It's your society that decides how motherhood and fatherhood should be like. सबसे पहली चीज. Number two, आपकी society एक particular perception hold करती है about what motherhood should be like or about how fatherhood should be like. Clear? A perception based on a particular ideology. If it is a social construct, I'm sure you'd all agree आपके पास variations होंगी society के अंदर. The way motherhood or fatherhood is seen in, yeah, the way motherhood and fatherhood is seen in one part of the world might be different from how it is seen in another. Clear? Now, along with this perception, my dear, leads to prescription. Prescription, आप prescription का जब हम लोग term use करते हैं, तो we usually refer to, I mean, usually हम लोग prescription का term use कर रहे होते हैं जब हम डॉक्टर्स के पास जाते हैं, किसी भी प्रैक्टिशनर के पास जाते हैं, वो हमें कोई भी prescription देता है. Prescription, in other words, something that's been prescribed, or in other words, your society has certain parameters. Every society has certain parameters that have been set, जिसके हिसाब से आप लोग गॉज कर रहे होते हो कि जनाब, is motherhood being done the way it should be done? Is fatherhood done the way it should be done? Clear? अब इन perceptions की basis पे आप लोग prescribe कर रहे होते हैं, right? Prescriptions or a prescribed idea as to how motherhood and fatherhood should be like. ठीक है? उनको बोल दें, मेरे बारे में मेरा बोल दें. Can you just let this gentleman? आप बोल दें जी. Do we all get this, beta? Does anyone have any question? Now, if we talk about the significance of this particular topic in terms of the past papers that we've had, in October, November 2021, you had a question on this. It's a tiny little 4-mark question that says, describe 2 ways fatherhood has changed. Now, this same question, it can be turned into a typical 8-mark question too, right? Where you might be asked to explain 2 ways in which fatherhood has changed. Ab zahir hai, the way you do a 4-marker question and the way you do an 8-mark question, there's a difference. इसी तरीके से आपके पास इसके ऊपर एक स्टेटमेंट आ सकती है. For instance, fatherhood has changed in modern industrial societies, full stop, followed by a 10-mark question that asks you to explain that statement, right? इसी चीज के ऊपर आपके पास motherhood से related 4-marker भी आ सकता है, 8-marker भी आ सकता है, 10-marker भी आ सकता है. Do we understand this? Now, this doesn't at all mean you cannot get a 26-mark question. Yes, so far, if we have a look at the past papers that we've had so far, तो अभी तक हमारे पास कोई क्वेश्चन नहीं है. Past papers from the year 2021 alone, because let me remind you that your syllabus had changed in 2021. तो 2021 के एक साल के अंदर हमारे पास जो questions आए, उनके अंदर हमें evidently कोई clear cut question नजर नहीं आ रहा about this. But then again, the likelihood, the possibility of you having a question there is always there. Now, if you get a 26-mark question, how would it be like? You can get a question that might say, evaluate the view that fatherhood has changed in modern industrial societies, or evaluate the view that the concepts of motherhood and fatherhood have changed in modern industrial societies. And that would give the examiner ample, or that would give you ample of content to be able to write on a typical 26-mark question on this. अभी तक नहीं आया, इसका मकसद ये नहीं कि इस पे दोबारा इसके ऊपर आ नहीं सकता, totally सकता है. Do we understand this? Getting back to where we had started off from. Now, when you talk about motherhood and fatherhood, like I said, आपके पास अलग-अलग ideologies हैं. Ideology क्या होती है? Any dominant set of ideas, right? So we have set of ideas as to how fatherhood should be like, how motherhood should be like. If I talk about uh, us, our society, us from a South Asian country, Pakistan, हमारे पास यहाँ पे majority आपकी ये assume करती है that the role of a father is to provide for the family, economic help, financial help, right? And if a father is not able to do so, the society looks down upon you, right? If a father is not able to do so, it's considered to be something that's shameful. And likewise, जिस तरीके से आपके पास certain prescribed notions हैं as to how motherhood, fatherhood should be like, उसी तरीके से you have certain expectations, certain prescriptions as to how motherhood should be like. And guess what? Our society or societies in general, because I'd like to remind you, हम लोग patriarchal societies का हिस्सा है. Patriarchy, what does the word patriarchy mean? Patriarchy means male domination. हमारे पास male dominated societies हैं, and the parameters that are set for motherhood and fatherhood, if we compare both of them, there are harsher rules and regulations in terms of how motherhood should be like, right? People are more strict. Ji beta. Yes, again, आपके पास societal differences हैं, right? कुछ societies में ऐसा होता है, कुछ में नहीं होता. आप अभी बात कर रहे हैं typical South Asian society की, that's totally okay, that's relatable. We've been born and brought up over here, but if you compare that with, let's just say, an African society, yes, you may, but then do mention कि आप किस society की बात कर रहे हैं. ठीक है? तो it is impossible, of course, to examine childhood without examining motherhood and fatherhood. An examination of the social attitudes that dominate particular societies suggests that there exist ideologies both for motherhood and fatherhood. Ideology hai kya? Ideologies are dominant set of ideas that make clear cultural expectations about how fathers and mothers should ideally behave. हम cultural expectations की बात कर रहे हैं, और ये cultural expectations, I'm sure you'd all agree, if we're comparing countries out in the West, अगर आप West की बात करते हैं, Western societies को, if you're comparing them with our societies, South Asian societies maybe, so you'd see that there is a difference there. The expectations that are there out of motherhood and fatherhood, they differ. और ये differences आपके पास सिर्फ और सिर्फ कल्चर की बेसिस पे नहीं है. So सिर्फ और सिर्फ आपके पास क्रॉस कल्चरल वेरिएशंस के थ्रू हम नहीं फिगर आउट कर, हमें नजर नहीं आती. इफ यू गो बैक इन टाइम इन हिस्ट्री, आप देखोगे हाउ these notions of fatherhood and motherhood, they've changed. What motherhood was like, let's just say 50 years from today, 50 years back, compared to what motherhood is like today is different. And you never know how motherhood would be like 50 years from today. अगर हम 2022 से 2072 तक चले जाते हैं, तो there's a possibility motherhood, and there's a possibility, yes. Clear? Now moving on. For example, most societies expect parents to care for their children. Consequently, most societies have laws, especially in the Western world. In more developed countries, the USA, the UK, there are laws that are passed that apparently protect childhood. Yes, बच्चा पुलिस को कॉल कर दे. Battering isn't allowed, smacking isn't allowed, neglect isn't allowed, abuse isn't allowed, physical or psychological. Clear here? Consequently, most societies have laws which punish parents who do not live up to a society's cultural expectation. अब यहाँ पे again laws की भी हम बात करते हैं, तो आपके पास cross cultural variations है. पाकिस्तान के अंदर बड़ी कन्वीनियंटली अम्मा अब्बा बच्चे को एक आध लगा देते हैं. ऑलमोस्ट रोज वो बच्चा चुप बच्चा डिफर करता है. भरी क्लास में कह रहे हैं ऑलमोस्ट रोज, थोड़ी हरकतें सीधी कर लें अपने. चलिए जी, आप आपस में आप compete करेंगे. Do we proceed? About how parents should treat their children. However, an examination of parenting suggests that in patriarchal societies, the cultural expectations regarding motherhood are generally harsher in terms of judgments than the cultural expectations about fatherhood. Come on, we all know this. In our part of the world, if a woman chooses to opt for a career, it is assumed that she might not be able to cater to her motherhood needs, probably because the prescribed notions of what motherhood should be like in our. मैं ठीक है बात कर लेता हूँ उनसे. जी बच्चा once the class is done उस वक्त कीजिएगा. Okay, are we good here? About fatherhood. However, there are signs that social attitudes about fatherhood held by male may be undergoing positive change as well. Right. So one, motherhood is usually scrutinized in a harsher manner. Number two, the societies overall, more in the Western world, less in our world, but nonetheless, there have been changes. There have been certain changes that have been noticed in terms of fatherhood too. A positive change rather. Clear here? Moving on. Let's start off with motherhood or these notions of motherhood. Let me give you a simple example. Let's start off with the pre-industrial era over here. अगर हम प्री इंडस्ट्रियल सोसाइटीज की बात करते हैं तो प्री इंडस्ट्रियल सोसाइटीज के अंदर अगर हम स्पेशली कॉटेज इंडस्ट्रीज की बात करें कॉटेज इंडस्ट्रीज के अंदर आई एम श्योर यू डू रिमेंबर वी डिस्कस दिस न्यूमरस टाइम्स अर्लियर आपके पास कॉटेज इंडस्ट्रीज के अंदर पेरेंट्स बोथ ऑफ द पेरेंट्स दैट इज फादर्स एंड मदर्स दे बोथ यूज्ड टू वर्क कॉटेज इंडस्ट्री है क्या जनाब जब मैं कॉटेज इंडस्ट्री का यहाँ पे टर्म यूज कर रहा हूँ तो आई एम रेफरिंग टू हाउस होल्ड्स यूज्ड टू प्ले the role of they were households being or families being unit of production. Families के अंदर एक स्मॉल स्केल पे डोमेस्टिक लेवल पे चीजें मैन्युफैक्चर की जाती थी चीजें मैन्युफैक्चर करके बाद में बेची जाती थी या बांटा की जाती थी ठीक है तो अगर आपके पास घर के अंदर ही चीजें प्रोड्यूस हो रही हैं तो देयर इज अ पॉसिबिलिटी दैट द इन्वॉल्वमेंट ऑफ बोथ the husband and wife that is in this context both mother and father would be there right if they were both back at home both doing the same job or doing the same work, the likelihood of there being not much of a difference between the roles of motherhood and fatherhood is always there. Again, there are differences. ये मैं बात कर रहा हूँ Western world की. Pakistan के अंदर things again or South Asian countries के अंदर things again were different. Even if you talk about the pre-industrial era, even if you talk about cottage industry, like I was giving you guys an example the other day, पाकिस्तान के अंदर आज भी कुछ ऐसे लोग हैं जैसे घरों पे चीजें बनवाते हैं बाहर बेचते हैं राइट तो घरों पे चीजें बनवा तो रहे होते हैं घर वालों से तो घर वाले अगर वो चीजें प्रोड्यूस कर रहे हैं तो एट द सेम टाइम दैट पर्सन or whoever the person is that man's wife would be playing it's the likelihood of her playing the sole role or taking the sole responsibility of childcare might be there डोमेस्टिक अरेंजमेंट्स की सारी रिस्पांसिबिलिटी खातून के ऊपर ही होंगी राइट तो अगेन हमें क्रॉस कल्चरल वेरिएशंस को मद्देनजर रखना है अगेन हमें सोसाइटीज के बीच में जो डिफरेंसेस होते हैं उसे इग्नोर नहीं करना ठीक है नाउ टेकिंग इट अहेड इफ वी टॉकिंग अबाउट मदरहुड हियर इफ वी टॉक अबाउट मदरहुड Arfini in 2016 points out that in the pre-industrial period of many societies, the role of parenting was not clearly differentiated. Not clearly differentiated between mothers and fathers because the whole family was involved in both agriculture and domestic labor. If you're talking about an agrarian society, you could talk about an agrarian society. You could also talk about a cottage industry. First, home and work became separate domains, but it was, However, industrialization led to a major change in the organization of parenting. Industrialization hui. Industrialization ke baad, as many feminists claim, it was after industrialization that it was seen that mothers it was seen that one of the partners देखिए इंडस्ट्रियलाइजेशन आई तो कॉटेज इंडस्ट्री को नुकसान हुआ वो चीजें जो आप घर पे प्रोड्यूस करते थे उसको अगर आप कंपेयर करें विद प्रोडक्ट्स दैट वर मैन्युफैक्चर्ड एट ऑन अ मासिव स्केल बेटर क्वालिटी चीपर प्राइसेस तो कॉटेज इंडस्ट्री वो प्रोडक्ट्स जो आप घर पे बना रहे थे दे कुडंट रियली compete अगर आप compete नहीं कर पा रहे उन प्रोडक्ट्स के साथ जो कि मैसिव स्केल में हाईली टेक्नोलॉजिकली एडवांस्ड मशीनरी के थ्रू बन रहे हैं तो इवेंचुअली आपके पास आहिस्ता आहिस्ता कॉटेज इंडस्ट्री खत्म होना शुरू हो गई कॉटेज इंडस्ट्री खत्म हो गई तो families had to do something for the survival right which led to one of the individual or one of the either the father or the mother having to leave home and because men are considered to be stronger men were the one who actually left home. When men left home to work, to be a part of paid employment, which again was facilitated through industrialization, it was the woman who was left back home to cater to the child's needs. And slowly and gradually, we got to the point that it was seen that it is a woman's responsibility. Clear here? Now, industrialization led to a major change in organization of parenting for two reasons. First, home and work became separate domains, but it was men who left the home in order to earn the family wage. Second, the state eventually banned child labor. And if the state is banning child labor, that means kids either study or they stay back home. If kids are staying back home, there has to be at least one family member to look after them, which led to the females, which led to mothers being left behind at home. Clear here? And restricted women's labor opportunities too, because children needed a family member to look after them. Consequently, an ideology of motherhood and domestically evolved as societies grew more modern during the 19th and 20th century. Arfini argues that the 20th century in particular saw the emergence of traditional ideas of motherhood, which were defined as a good mother. Clear? A woman, a mother being seen as a domestic goddess, expected from her to nurture the child, to take care of, or to cater to all sort of domestic responsibilities. And since she was the one who was bearing a child, that is giving birth to a child, it back then made a lot of sense to expect from her to rear a child too. I'm using two different words over here: bearing and rearing. Bearing, giving birth; rearing, upbringing of a child. Clear, beta? Now, Arfini argues that the 20th century in particular saw the emergence of traditional idea of motherhood, which defined being a good mother as someone who stayed at home full time and who was happy to be economically dependent on the male breadwinner and to be fulfilled by a natural predisposition. Again, an ideology, a perspective, a school of thought, an idea that women have a natural predisposition towards all the homely and domestic affairs. Clear? I'm calling this an ideology. This is not a fact. Clear? To be combined domestic goddesses, nurture of children, and emotional caretakers and caregivers. Do we all understand this? Ji beta. नहीं क्वेश्चन ये था नहीं, आप क्वेश्चन को नजर रिकॉर्ड से देखेंगे ना अभी अब we get there just give me a couple of minutes, we're getting there. ठीक है? According to functionist sociologist Parsons, now I'm sure everyone remembers Parsons, the American functionalist, very prominent in 1960s and 70s, faculty member of the Harvard University, a middle class American. अब ये सारे characteristics मैं बार बार Parsons के इसलिए लेता हूँ because I want you all to remember कि वो American था, वो अपना culture, उसकी research को हम लोग ethnocentric कह सकते हैं, cultural relativism. His research, his work focused more on the American society. He belonged to a middle class background. If you're talking about someone who belongs to a middle class background, of course, उसको आप अगर compare करते हैं with someone from a working class background or the upper class background, things would be very different. Clear? Now, such as Parsons' claim, if you all remember, Parsons came up with this notion. Come up again. He was an American himself. He lived there. That's what he saw and experienced. बेटा उसने नहीं किया ना मतलब देखो बच्चे जरूरी कुछ भी नहीं होता मैथ 2 + 2 = 4 नहीं पढ़ रहे Parsons was an American, he lived there, he worked there, so it's highly likely that his findings had some or the other values. I mean his values, his findings about how he thought families were like had to do with the American society. Okay? Now moving on, if you all remember, while we speak about Parsons, he came up with the idea of women playing expressive roles and men playing instrumental roles. Instrumental roles as fathers. This has to do with fatherhood. instrumental expressive roles as mothers. This has to do with motherhood. Clear, dear? Now, such as Parsons, mothers performed an expressive role within families, taking charge of the children's education and taking exclusive responsibility for household affairs. Fathers were instrumental leaders. They were the economic providers and head of households responsible for imposing strict discipline on both his wife and children and ensuring the living standards of the nuclear family unit. He was not expected to play any significant role in domestic or childcare activity. Do we all understand this? Do we proceed? Taking it ahead, Arfini argues that the mother's parenting style in early 20th century families in the USA and Europe was culturally expected to be nurturing and indulgent, while those cultures expected a good deal less from the parenting styles of fathers, which could be best summed up as authoritarian and neglectful. Get this here? However, ideas about parenting styles began to shift in more industrialized societies during the 1950s and 1960s, when more and more mothers began to enter the workforce, accomplishing a double role as a mother at home and as an earner at work. Are we through? In combining these two aspects, the mother's role shifted from expressive to intensive. Why intensive? Because of this. And if you remember, the feminist Anne Oakley, she came up with this idea of dual burden. Women being expected to work outside home and inside home, which again makes it pretty intensive. Clear? About the same time, fathers became more involved in children's lives, and there was no longer a distinctive separation between the two roles of father and mother. In the 1970s, feminists started to critique both motherhood and fatherhood and to claim that both of these roles were socially constructed by patriarchal ideology and institutions. इससे पहले हम लोगों ने बात की है these roles being socially constructed. Now we're talking about these roles being socially constructed according to patriarchal ideologies. Patriarchy, male domination. Of course, someone who brings back money home has more of say. Whoever brings back money home has the power to take decisions, to claim his superiority. Clear, dear? Do we all understand this? Moving on, Chambers argues that in both modern and less industrialized societies today, there exists an ideology of motherhood which is organized around the idea of putting children's need first, which is again more clear-cut when you talk about societies like ours, the lesser developed parts of the world. However, if you compare them with Western societies, things are different when it comes to Western societies. These differences might not be as clear-cut as they are in our part of the world. Clear, dear? So yeah, do you guys all understand this? Everyone gets this? So the societies in general, like I was saying, this difference is more clear-cut in our part of the world as compared to the Western world. Today, I mean, not today, women were expected to put children's needs first. She says the mother is perceived as the core of the family, as the emotional stabilizer that keeps the whole family together. Data from surveys conducted around the world generally support Chambers' observations. For example, data from attitude surveys conducted in the range of European societies suggests that a dominant cultural expectation is that women should prioritize their caring role over having a job. Clear? And I don't think I need to explain this as much. We very clearly and evidently see this, experience this in our part of the world. ठीक है? Family first. करियर बाद में देखेंगे. क्या यही expectations father से भी होती हैं? Not as harsh. Because a man, especially in our part of the world, is expected to be the whole sole breadwinner. I know things are changing. Today, as I speak, societies today are okay with men prioritizing their careers. But this isn't the same for females. Okay? In addition, most surveys suggest that there's a deep-seated belief in society in general that the role of mother is just as fulfilling as the role of a worker. Now, this is pretty important. Again, where did this belief come from? And why deep-seated? Who's responsible for it? Is it the patriarchal ideology? Where did it start from? How is it instilled? How strong is it? What would it take to bring in a change? How long is it going to take to bring in a change? Do we proceed? Now, these surveys indicate that a majority still believe that children are negatively affected if the mother works. Women, therefore, are expected to take on jobs that are compatible with family commitments. And hence why many women, you see so many women, they're into teaching, primary schools. आपका काम खत्म होगा, आपके बच्चे की छुट्टी होगी, दोनों हंसी खुशी घर आ जाएंगे. Clear? और जहां पे घर आके the mother's role again shifts from paid employment to from paid work to unpaid work now, because that is seen to be her responsibility. Moving on. Women, therefore, are expected to take on jobs that are compatible with family commitments. Moreover, the popularity of such beliefs means that large numbers of mothers feel guilty about working full time. Clear here? Guilty. Getting this? Some actually give up work altogether because they believe that their absence somehow damages their children. Leonard in 2000 argues that women who continue to see housework and childcare as an essential part of being a good wife and mother are more likely to be satisfied with an unequal domestic division of labor. Right here? Then women who reject such roles. However, there are signs that attitudes towards motherhood may be undergoing some significant change in more industrial societies, as the following examples illustrate. Having a look at these examples. Number one, Wilkinson in 1994 argued that survey of young women indicate a radical shift in attitudes towards motherhood among young women, compared with the attitudes held by the mothers and grandmothers. She argues that this attitudinal shift is so great that it can be termed as a gender quake. This term gender quake, we have studied this, we've discussed this numerous times earlier. Analogy, geological hint, earthquake, gender quake. Gender roles में इस हद तक changes आई हैं कि हिला के रख दिया है. Get it here? Now, attitudinal shift is so great that it can be termed a gender quake. Wilkinson notes that previous generations ranked motherhood at the very top of or very high on their list of priorities. However, recent surveys suggest that this priority is no longer so high on young women's to-do list, as careers and consumption of leisure have become more important. This change is reflected in two other trends as well. Do we all understand this? We're talking about a change in terms of priority, in terms of preference. We're linking gender quake to it. The idea is, अगर आप खवातीन की टू डू लिस्ट देखेंगे तो उनके लिए उनका करियर, उनका कंजम्पशन पैटर्न, उनका लीजर activities, or combine them together, consumption of leisure. There are many women who prioritize this instead of motherhood, and it wouldn't be wrong to refer to this as a radical shift today. Taking it ahead, there's evidence that educated women, especially those in professional and managerial jobs, are postponing motherhood until the late 30s and even 40s and electing to have fewer children. Moreover, some women are electing to raise their children alone. right? Many societies approve it. Likewise, the idea that women can bring up so we got disconnected. Let's take a start again. Yeah. So the second point over here, we're talking about mothers, women postponing motherhood. Clear? One. Number two, we spoke about there being an increase in the amount of women, the number of women who decide on bringing up their child on their own, not being dependent on a male. They're rejecting the notion that they or their children need a male in their lives. Too radical of an approach, but yeah, the second point. Moving on to the third one. A significant number of women are choosing voluntary childlessness. They're rejecting motherhood in order to be child free. Giddens in 1992 claims that this trend stems from the ideology of individualization. Individualization. Individuals today, females are individuals too, them being more self oriented, thinking about their own wishes, desires, preferences, and setting priorities accordingly. Voluntary childlessness having to do with individualization, rejecting the notions of romantic love and marriage, prioritizing their careers, maybe. Do we understand this? Number three, the renewed popularity of activists or digital feminism has led some females to see motherhood as an oppressive ideology. It keeps on getting more intense, right? Negating the idea of being a mother totally. You could link it, take it back to the radical feminists. What is the name? Linda, the feminist who came up with the idea of baby strike. No, Greer came up with the idea of segregation. Liberal feminists, no, not liberal feminists, radical feminists. What's the name? What was it? Lindani, Laura Purdy, the idea of a baby strike. Remember? So, the renewed popularity of activists or digital feminism has led some females to see motherhood as an oppressive ideology. You could talk about Shulamit Firestone too, right? अब Laura Purdy, Greer या Shulamit Firestone ये digital feminist नहीं है, right? You take them back to the second wave of feminism, but nonetheless, as an oppressive ideology and practice which restrict independence and their ability to compete equally with men in the workplace. Do we all understand this? So there were these 4 points that we discussed over here, where we spoke about the signs that attitude towards motherhood are undergoing a significant change, are undergoing a change. Do we proceed, beta? Now, taking it ahead, moving on, let's talk about fatherhood. When we talk about fatherhood over here, Tina Miller in 2010 argues that the responsibilities and practices associated with fatherhood are not so clear cut or as morally regulated as their of motherhood. Right? अगर आप compare करते हैं, so like we have discussed twice earlier, the societies in large in general have harsher rules and regulations or harsher expectations when it comes to motherhood and not fatherhood. However, there's an ideology of fatherhood which is mainly associated with concepts of breadwinner. Again, an ideology. And many parts of the world, whole soul breadwinner, the only breadwinner. Clear? Family provider, head of the household, unemotional, disciplinarian, and how absent fathers are disapproved of. Taking it ahead, research by Huari et al. Found that Pakistani, Afro Caribbean, and Black African families continue to define and judge fathers in terms of how well they economically provide for their families. It's nothing we're unaware of. We know this. Salve et al. Studied four ethnic religious Asian groups: Bangladeshi Muslims, Pakistani Muslims, Gujarati Hindus, and Punjabi Sikhs. The study found that the community had great respect for those fathers who took economic responsibility for their family. Men who did not or could not support their children were labeled as shameful. They're talking about us, our society. We're all aware of this. पता है इन सारी चीजों को आप लोग आंसर्स के अंदर क्रॉस कल्चरल कंपैरिजन के लिए इस्तेमाल कर सकते हैं. थैंक यू. रख दें, यहीं पे रखते हैं. ठीक है. I wouldn't call it a fact. ठीक है. I wouldn't like to agree to that either. See, आप sociology पढ़ रहे हो बेटा. हाइड्रोजन और ऑक्सीजन टुगेदर मेकिंग H2O वो नहीं पढ़ रहे हम. तो हम डेफिनेट यहाँ इतना पत्थर पे लकीर की तरह किसी चीज को नहीं ला सकते यहाँ पे. Joe Warren et al. In 1999 in the study of 95 families in the UK also found that fathers, mothers, and teenage children overwhelmingly subscribed to the view that male should be the breadwinner. Despite changes in employment and family life, the majority of the sample believed that mothers should dominate childcare because they were the experts in parenting. Again, referring to them as experts in parenting. An ideology, a deep-rooted, deep-seated ideology, a patriarchal ideology. Get it? However, there are signs that men have become more willing to involve themselves in childcare. In the early 1990s, many sociologists concluded that the role of fathers was changing. For example, now देखिए 1990s अगर आप Western world की बात करते हैं तो हमारे पास पाकिस्तान में change आते आते 20 साल लग जाते हैं, right? The role of fathers was changing. For example, men in the 1990s were more likely to attend the birth of their babies than men in the 1960s, and they were more likely to play a greater role in childcare than their own fathers. Right? Birds in 1997 found that fathers were taking an increasingly active role in the emotional development of their children. Beck in 1992 argued that in the 21st century, fathers can no longer rely on jobs to provide a sense of identity and fulfillment. Increasingly, they look to their children to give their life's purpose and meaning. Clear, dear? Research by Gray in 2006 support this view. Her research showed that fathers emphasized the need to spend quality time with their children. They wanted more time to get to know their children, to take them out, to help them with homework, to talk to them. Fathers viewed time spent with children in outings, sport, play, and conversation as an expression of fatherhood rather than as a form of domestic work. Now we're talking about a shift, a gradual shift, a slow change, which eventually, as it looks like, is moving towards egalitarianism. A slow change. Clear, dear? However, it is important not to exaggerate men's role in childcare. Looking after children is still overwhelmingly the responsibility of mothers. Primarily, it is assumed to be, it is considered to be a female's job. A mother's job. A man would do it if he feels like. If he's not doing it, the likelihood, the chances of him being penalized is less, right? आपके पास बार बार कह रहा हूं मैं, आपके पास वेरिएशंस हैं कल्चर की बेसिस पे, सोशल ग्रुप्स की बेसिस पे, एथनिक डिविजन्स की बेसिस पे, एजुकेशन की बेसिस पे. क्लियर? Looking after children is still overwhelmingly the responsibility of mothers rather than jointly shared with fathers. Recent research has focused on the pressure of work in the 21st century. A survey of British males conducted by Lavelle et al. In 2002 found that 30% of fathers and 6% of mothers worked more than 48 hours a week on a regular basis. Clear? See, there's a difference. Okay? Gray found that many fathers would like to spend more time with their children but are prevented by long hours from bonding effectively with their children. ये अक्सर घरों की कहानी नजर आती है आपको पाकिस्तान में आज भी. Likewise, Barbara Risman's 1986 research on single fathers as homemakers reject the view that women have a natural predisposition to be mothers and that raising of children should be their responsibility. Like I said, हम लोग biology को ऐड कर रहे होते हैं यहाँ पे, लेकिन हम थोड़ा गौर करें तो biology से ज्यादा हमें society का influence नजर आएगा. I'm sure you would know of someone who, because of any reason at all, usually typically in the case of death of the wife, ends up being the whole soul caretaker of the child. There are instances where a man of the house goes unemployed. If the woman's working and she's doing good, responsibilities change होती हैं. अक्सर घरों में हमें नजर आता है, and men end up doing well. If those men are doing well, why bring in biology? Why call it a fact like this gentleman is? Would you stop taking a picture? You're not allowed to take a picture, please. Why do you need to take a picture of this? You want this, you ask for it, I'll give it to you. Don't take a picture. I'll send it to you. Don't take pictures. Do we proceed? Now, she found that single fathers were just as effective and competent as mothers in terms of their parenting skills. She concludes that we need to re-examine the general belief that only mothers have the natural skills to raise children, right? Re-examining it. If you're re-examining it, you'd probably end up rejecting this natural predisposition ka idea. Get it, beta? And that children belong with their mothers after divorce. We need to stop thinking that nurturing is only a female skill. We must adapt to the fact that a father can also fulfill the traditional role of the mother, the traditional role of the mother, the societal expectations from mothers. Do we get this, beta? Again, there are variations. Yes, beta. Again, there are variations. Let's have a look at this. I want everyone to read through this. Come on, give this a read. Give this a read. जी हाँ, paper 2 totally family है. Give this read. Come on, quick. Identity and socialization, identity and research methods, paper 1 है. Come on, beta, give this a read. Shabash. बेटा इस वक्त इसको पढ़ें प्लीज आप. There are 4 papers in total that we have in A-level sociology, 2 in AS, 2 in A2. It's high time you don't listen to him. This is a summary in pointers. Are we all done? Are we all done with this, beta? So yeah, this brings this topic that was unit 4.4.4 to an end, and this officially brings in your unit family to an end. And I'd want everyone to read through this unit thoroughly. I know there's a lot of reading that I'm talking about, but the more you read, the more you put your pen to paper, the higher the chances are of you doing well in your papers. Do we have any questions? Anything? So yeah, this brings this topic to an end here.